Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration ship Odyssey and watched the blue planet grow larger on the main screen. This was Zephyr Prime, home to one of the oldest alien races in the galaxy. The planet looked like a giant sapphire, floating in space, covered in crystal cities that caught starlight and threw it back in rainbow colors. Jake had seen many worlds in his years as a captain, but nothing quite like this one. "Captain, we're getting their docking instructions now," said Lieutenant Danny Park from his station. The young man's voice carried a hint of nervousness that Jake understood well. This was humanity's first real chance to make friends with an advanced alien race, and everyone knew how much was riding on this mission. Dr. Lisa Carter walked up beside Jake, her tablet in hand showing data about their destination. She was the team's expert on alien cultures and had spent months studying what little they knew about the Zephyrians. "Their society is very different from ours," she said quietly. "They value perfection above almost everything else. Physical, beauty, mental clarity, social order. Everything has its place, and everything must be perfect." Commander Alex Hughes joined them, his military bearing evident even in the relaxed atmosphere of the bridge. "And if we mess this up, they'll never trade with us again. Earth needs that mineral they're offering. Our new space drives won't work without it," Jake nodded. The rare element found in Zephyrian space was the key to faster space travel for humanity. Without it, they would remain stuck in their small corner of the galaxy, while other races expanded their territories and influence. The Zephyrians had agreed to this meeting only because they needed something too, rare metals that Earth had in abundance. The ship shuddered slightly as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the view screen, Jake could see the capital, city rising from the surface like a forest of crystal trees. Each building was perfectly shaped, catching and reflecting light in patterns that seemed almost alive. Flying vehicles moved between the towers in organized streams, never crossing paths or deviating from their assigned routes. "Look at that," whispered Danny. "It's like they built a city out of diamonds." "Remember," Lisa said, "they see us as crude and primitive. We need to show them that humans can be civilized partners, not just another barbaric species looking for handouts." The docking bay they were assigned was enormous, large enough to hold a dozen ships the size of the Odyssey. As Jake and his small diplomatic team prepared to leave their ship, he felt the weight of representing all of humanity. 3 people to speak for billions back home, trying to convince an ancient race that Earth was worth their attention. Airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Jake got his first look at real Zephyrians. They were tall and graceful, nearly 7 feet in height, with skin that seemed to glow with a soft blue light. Their faces were angular and beautiful, with large eyes that held intelligence and perhaps a touch of arrogance. They moved like dancers, every step perfectly placed and purposeful. The lead Zephyrian stepped forward and spoke in accented English. "Welcome to Zephyr Prime. I am Ambassador Torvin. The Emperor has graciously agreed to receive your delegation." His tone was polite but cool, like someone greeting unwelcome but necessary guests. The journey through the city to the Imperial Palace was breathtaking. The Zephyrians had created a world where every surface was smooth, every angle was perfect, and every color was carefully chosen to create harmony. Gardens filled with crystalline plants lined the wide streets, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with cleanliness. Jake noticed that every Zephyrian they passed looked like they had stepped out of an art gallery, beautiful and flawless. The palace was the most impressive building Jake had ever seen. It rose from the center of the city like a mountain made of light, its walls transparent in some places and opaque in others, creating patterns that shifted as the sun moved across the sky. Inside, the halls were vast and filled with the soft sound of what might have been music, though unlike any music. Jake knew they were led to a reception hall where the imperial family waited. The emperor sat on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal, flanked by his children. Jake recognized them from the briefing materials. The crown prince and his sisters, all perfect examples of Zephyrian beauty and grace. They stood in order of importance, each one looking like they had been sculpted rather than born. But as Jake scanned the group, he noticed movement in the shadows behind the throne. Someone else was there, partially hidden by a pillar. It was another Zephyrian, clearly female, but something was different about her. While the others stood in the light, confident and proud, this one seemed to prefer the darkness. The formal introductions began with elaborate ceremony. Each member of the royal family was presented with their full titles and accomplishments. The crown prince had led successful military campaigns. The eldest daughter had mastered 17 forms of art. The second daughter had solved complex mathematical theorems that had puzzled scholars for centuries. Each was perfect in their own way, but the figure in the shadows was never introduced. Jake found his attention drawn to her repeatedly during the long ceremony. When she thought no one was looking, she would lean forward slightly, her eyes bright with interest as the humans were presented. Unlike the cool indifference of her family, she seemed genuinely curious about these strange visitors from a distant world. The emperor finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of countless generations of rule. Humans of Earth, you have traveled far to reach our world. We understand you seek trade agreements for materials vital to your expansion. We will consider your request, though your species has little to offer that we cannot obtain elsewhere. Lisa stepped forward to begin the formal negotiations, presenting humanity's case with carefully prepared arguments and data. But Jake found his eyes drifting back to the mysterious figure in the shadows. There was something about her that seemed different from the others, something that drew his attention in a way he couldn't quite explain. During a break in the proceedings, as the royal family moved to another chamber for private discussion, Jake saw his chance. The shadowed figure had remained behind, apparently not included in the family conference. He approached her carefully, not wanting to cause offense. As he drew closer, he could see that she was indeed beautiful like the others, but her face bore thin scars that ran from her left temple to her jaw. Her arms also showed marks from old wounds. In human society, such scars might tell stories of bravery or survival. Here, they seemed to mark her as somehow lesser than her perfect siblings. She noticed his approach and tensed, as if expecting him to turn away in disgust like others. Probably did. Instead, Jake smiled and offered a polite bow, as he had been taught. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison," he said simply. "I don't believe we were introduced." The alien princess looked at him with surprise, then something that might have been curiosity. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a musical quality that was both beautiful and somehow sad. "I am Lyra Thys, third daughter of the Emperor. I was not presented because ... She hesitated, touching one of her scars unconsciously. "Because you're even more interesting than the others," Jake said, and meant it. Something about her intelligence, her obvious curiosity about his people, and yes, even her scars, made her seem more real than her perfect siblings. She stared at him with wide eyes, as if he had said something impossible. "Why do you stare at me like that, human?" she asked, locking eyes with him. Jake looked into Lyra Thys' eyes and saw confusion mixed with something that might have been hope. Her question hung in the air between them like a challenge. He could tell that his answer would matter more than any diplomatic speech he might give to her father. "I stare because you're the first person here who seems genuinely interested in learning about us," Jake said honestly. "Your family looks at us like we're a problem to be solved. You look at us like we're people worth knowing." Lyra Thys blinked slowly, her large eyes reflecting the crystal light of the palace. "Others stare at me too, but not like that. They see my imperfections and either look away quickly or stare in disgust. You stare as if ... She paused, searching for words. As if my scars don't make me hideous. Before Jake could respond, Ambassador Torvin appeared at his elbow. Captain Morrison, the Emperor requires your presence. The negotiations are resuming. His tone suggested that talking to Lyra Thais was not appropriate behavior for an honored guest. As Jake was led away, he glanced back to see Lyra Thais watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was something there, a spark of interest or perhaps understanding that hadn't been there before. The next 3 days of negotiations went poorly. The Zephyrians offered terms that were barely better than theft. They wanted most of Earth's rare mineral deposits in exchange for a tiny amount of their space drive material. When Lisa tried to negotiate better terms, the Crown Prince dismissed her concerns with a wave of his perfect hand. Your species is desperate, he said coldly. You have nothing we truly need except these raw materials. Consider our offer generous, given your primitive state. Jake watched his teammates' faces grow tight with controlled anger. Alex Hughes looked ready to say something that would end the talks permanently. Lisa was making notes furiously, probably calculating how long humanity could survive without this deal. But what bothered Jake most was how the Zephyrians treated their own family member. During formal meals, Lyra Thais sat at the far end of the table, almost out of sight. When cultural presentations were made, she remained in the background. When important visitors toured the palace, she was nowhere to be seen. On the third evening, there was a grand ceremony showcasing Zephyrian achievements. Perfect singers performed impossible harmonies, while perfect dancers moved like living art. Perfect scholars presented mathematical proofs that made Lisa gasp with admiration. Everything was flawless, beautiful, and somehow cold. Jake noticed Lyra Thais watching from a balcony high above the main floor. She was alone, excluded from participating in her own culture's celebration. When a group of Zephyrian nobles passed near Jake, he heard one of them make a comment about damaged goods and genetic failures. The casual cruelty in their voices made Jake's hands clench into fists. After the ceremony ended, Jake couldn't find his teammates. Lisa was probably in her quarters reviewing negotiation strategies, and Alex was likely checking security protocols. Jake found himself walking through the palace gardens, trying to clear his head and think of a way to save the failing talks. The gardens were as perfect as everything else on this world. Crystal trees grew in precise patterns, their branches creating geometric shapes that pleased the eye. Paths of smooth stone wound between beds of plants that seemed to glow with their own inner light. It was beautiful, but Jake found himself missing the chaotic wilderness of earth forests. You look troubled, Captain Morrison. Jake turned to find Lyra Thais approaching along one of the garden paths. She moved differently than her family, less like a dancer, and more like someone trying not to be noticed. Up close, in the soft light of the glowing plants, her scars were more visible. They formed intricate patterns across her face and arms, like silver threads woven into blue silk. The negotiations aren't going well, Jake admitted. Your people seem to think we have no choice but to accept whatever they offer, don't they? Lyra Thais asked, tilting her head. From what I understand, your species needs our drive technology to expand beyond your current space. Without it, you'll remain trapped in a small area of the galaxy. Jake was surprised by her knowledge. You know about our situation? I read everything I can about other species and their technologies. It's one of the few things I'm allowed to do freely. There was bitterness in her voice. My family considers it a harmless hobby for someone who can't participate in important matters. They walked together along the crystal paths, and Jake found himself relaxing for the first time since arriving on Zephyr Prime. Lyra Thais asked thoughtful questions about Earth culture, human art, and the diversity of life on his home world. Unlike her family's polite but dismissive interest, her curiosity seemed genuine. Tell me about these scars, Jake said gently, as they paused beside a fountain that sang with flowing water. How did you get them? Leerithis touched her face self-consciously. An accident when I was young. I was exploring areas of the palace I wasn't supposed to visit. There was an explosion in an old laboratory. The medical treatment saved my life, but couldn't prevent the scarring. She looked down. In our culture, physical perfection reflects inner worth. These marks show everyone that I'm flawed, incomplete. That's interesting, Jake said. In human culture, scars often tell stories of courage or survival. We have sayings about how scars show that someone was stronger than whatever tried to hurt them. Leerithis stared at him. You truly see them that way? I see someone who survived something that could have killed her, and who still has enough curiosity to risk exploring forbidden places, Jake said. That tells me you're brave and intelligent, not flawed. For a long moment, they stood in silence, except for the singing fountain. Then Leerithis spoke very quietly. No one has ever said anything like that to me before. The next morning, Dr. Lisa Carter cornered Jake in his quarters. You need to be careful, she said without preamble. I've been researching Zephyrian social customs. Contact with their imperfect citizens is considered inappropriate for visiting dignitaries. If the Emperor thinks you're showing too much interest in his damaged daughter, it could destroy any chance we have of reaching an agreement. She's not damaged, Jake said firmly. She's probably the most interesting person on this entire world. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to get us thrown off this planet, Lisa replied. I know you feel sorry for her, but we can't let personal feelings interfere with humanity's future. Alex Hughes chose that moment to enter the room, his expression grim. We have bigger problems than social protocols, he said. I've been monitoring Zephyrian communications, and I picked up something troubling. There are military preparations happening that don't match their official explanations. What kind of preparations? Jake asked. Ship movements, weapon system activations, personnel reassignments. It looks like they're planning something they don't want us to know about. Alex handed Jake a datapad with his analysis. If I had to guess, I'd say they're preparing to take what they want from us by force. Jake studied the data, feeling cold understanding settle in his stomach. They never intended to negotiate fairly. They're planning to strand us here and take the Odyssey. Once they have our ship, they can reverse engineer our technology while keeping all their precious drive materials, Lisa said. We'd be prisoners on a world that sees us as inferior beings. The three humans looked at each other, realizing how completely they had been outmaneuvered. The Zephyrians had invited them here not to trade, but to steal. The perfect, beautiful, civilized aliens were planning to take everything humanity had offered and give nothing in return. That evening, Jake found himself back in the gardens despite Lisa's warnings. He needed to think, to find a way out of the trap they had walked into. To his surprise, Leerithis was already there, standing beside the singing fountain with her head bowed. You look troubled too, he said, approaching carefully. She looked up at him with an expression of pain that had nothing to do with her physical scars. I overheard my brother talking to the military commanders. They're planning to betray you, aren't they? Jake studied her face, seeing genuine distress there. What do you think? I think my family sees your people the same way they see me, she said quietly, as something flawed and inferior, useful only for what can be taken from them. She met his eyes. I'm sorry, Captain Morrison. You've shown me more kindness in a few days than my own people have in my entire life, and this is how we repay you. In that moment, Jake realized that Leerithis might be humanity's only hope. She was the one Zephyrian who saw them as people rather than resources. But asking for her help would mean asking her to betray her own species, her own family. Leerithis, he said carefully, if you knew of a way to prevent this betrayal, Would you take it?" She looked at him for a long time, her scarred face reflecting the light of the crystal trees. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a strength he hadn't heard before. "Ask me what you need to ask, human. I think it's time I chose which side of history I want to be on." Jake stared at Lyrithus, weighing his words carefully. The future of humanity might depend on what he said next. The garden around them seemed to hold its breath, the singing fountain growing quieter as if sensing the importance of this moment. "I need you to help me understand how your people think," Jake said finally. "If we're going to find a way out of this situation, I need to know how they plan to trap us and when they'll make their move." Lyrithus nodded slowly. "My brother believes your ship will be easy to capture because you trust too easily. He plans to disable your vessel's defenses during tomorrow's final ceremony and overwhelm your crew with superior numbers." She paused, touching one of her scars. "He calls it harvesting resources from primitives." The casual cruelty in her brother's phrase made Jake's jaw tighten. "And you're willing to help us stop this?" "I've spent my entire life watching my family treat others as less worthy because they aren't perfect," Lyrithus said. "You're the first beings I've met who look at imperfection and see strength instead of shame. Yes, I'll help you." Over the next hour, Lyrithus explained the detailed plan her family had created. The Zephyrians had prepared carefully, studying human technology and psychology. They knew that humans valued honor and would be reluctant to break diplomatic protocols, even when threatened. They planned to use this against them. "There's something else you should know," Lyrithus said as they prepared to part ways. "I've been working on improvements to our technology in my isolation. My family dismisses my work because of my appearance, but I believe I've solved several problems that have puzzled our best scientists." "What kind of improvements?" Jake asked. "Better efficiency in our drive systems, enhanced defensive capabilities, improved energy distribution," she said. "I have complete plans and prototypes hidden in my private laboratory. If you could get this information to your people, it might help level the playing field." Jake felt a spark of hope. "Would you be willing to share that information?" "More than willing," she said firmly. "I've spent years creating things that no one will ever see or use because I'm considered unworthy. At least with your people, my work might actually help someone." The next morning brought the final day of negotiations. The Zephyrian royal family gathered in their most impressive throne room, surrounded by military advisors and court officials. Jake noticed the subtle positioning of guards and the way certain exits had been quietly sealed. The trap was being prepared. Dr. Lisa Carter made one last attempt at reasonable negotiations, presenting detailed proposals for fair trade agreements. The Emperor listened with polite indifference, while his son barely concealed his impatience. Commander Alex Hughes stood alert, his hand never far from his weapon, despite the diplomatic setting. "Your proposals are interesting," the Emperor said finally. "We will need time to consider them fully. Perhaps your crew could join us for a special ceremony this evening while we deliberate." Jake knew this was the moment. Once they agreed to this ceremony, the trap would be complete. But refusing would make the Zephyrians suspicious and might endanger Lyrithus for her help. "We would be honored to attend," Jake said, playing his part. That afternoon, while his teammates prepared for what they all knew might be their last free evening, Jake met Lyrithus in her hidden laboratory. A room was tucked away in a forgotten corner of the palace, filled with advanced equipment and covered in complex diagrams that made Jake's head spin. "This is incredible work," he said, studying her designs. "Your people are fools not to see your brilliance. Intelligence without beauty is worthless in Zephyrian society," she replied, but there was less bitterness in her voice than before. "You've helped me realize that other cultures might value different things." She handed him a data crystal containing all her research. This includes everything I've discovered about our drive technology, our defensive systems, and the weaknesses. In both. If your people can study this, they might be able to create countermeasures. Jake pocketed the crystal carefully. This could save not just my crew, but give humanity the tools we need to defend ourselves in this galaxy. Why are you doing this? Lyra Thys was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on one of her workbenches. Do you know what it's like to be invisible in your own home? To have ideas and dreams that no one cares about because of how you look. You and your people see me as a person worth listening to. That's worth more than loyalty to those who've never shown me any kindness. As evening approached, Jake realized they needed a more detailed escape plan. The ceremony would take place in the main hall, with the human delegation seated in a place of honor. It was actually a carefully designed trap. Zephyrian soldiers would surround the building, and the HFY Odyssey would be boarded by technical teams, supposedly conducting routine inspections. There's a service passage that runs from the ceremonial hall to the docking bays, Lyra Thys explained, showing Jake a map of the palace. It's used by maintenance workers, and is usually empty during important events. If you can reach it, you might be able to get back to your ship. What about you? Jake asked. If we escape and your family realizes you helped us, what will happen to you? For the first time since he'd met her, Lyra Thys smiled. It transformed her scarred face, making her truly beautiful. I've been invisible my whole life. Maybe it's time I did something worth being seen for. The ceremony began with elaborate pageantry. Jake, Lisa, and Alex were seated at a high table where they could observe the cultural performances while being observed themselves. Jake noticed the subtle positioning of guards and the way certain court officials kept checking chronometers. Everything was proceeding according to the Zephyrian plan. During the third performance, a demonstration of traditional combat forms, Alex leaned close to Jake. Guard positions have shifted. They're definitely preparing to make their move. Lisa nodded slightly. I count at least 30 soldiers positioned around the exits. Once they seal this room, we won't be getting out through normal means. Jake watched Lyra Thys, who was seated with other minor royals at a side table. She caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. It was time. The lights dimmed for what was announced as the final performance of the evening. In the darkness, Jake felt a hand touch his shoulder. Lyra Thys had somehow moved from her table to theirs without being noticed, using the shadows and her lifetime of practice at being invisible. Now, she whispered, the passage entrance is behind the third pillar from the left. I'll create distraction. Before Jake could ask what she meant, Lyra Thys stood and walked toward the center of the performance area. In the dim lighting, her movement caught attention slowly, like ripples spreading across water. My father, my brother, honored guests, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. I have something to say about tonight's proceedings. The Emperor looked shocked. This was clearly not part of his plan. Lyra Thys, return to your seat immediately. No, she said simply. I've spent my entire life sitting quietly while others decided my worth. Tonight, I choose to stand. Jake realized what she was doing. By drawing all attention to herself, she was giving him and his team the chance they needed to slip away. But she was also painting a target on herself that might prove deadly. I know about your plan to betray our guests, Lyra Thys continued, her voice growing stronger. I know about the trap you've prepared, the soldiers waiting to strike. And I know that everything you've taught me about honor and civilization is a lie. The throne room erupted in shocked voices. Guards began moving toward Lyra Thys, but their attention was focused entirely on her. Jake grabbed Lisa and Alex, pulling them toward the pillar she had indicated. Behind them, they could hear Lyra Thys still speaking. These humans have shown me more respect in a few days than my own family has in my entire life. If that makes me a traitor to our people, then I am proud to be called one." The service passage was exactly where she had said it would be. As they ran through the narrow corridor toward the docking bays, Jake could hear alarms beginning to sound throughout the palace. Their escape had been discovered, but Lyrithis had bought them precious time. "Captain," Alex said as they ran, "what about her? We can't just leave her behind." Jake thought about the brave alien princess who had sacrificed everything to help them. "We're not leaving her behind," he said grimly. "We're going back for her." The service corridor seemed to stretch forever as Jake led his team toward the docking bays. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Zephyrian soldiers were flooding through the palace. Their perfect coordination turned toward hunting down the escaped humans. "Captain, we need to reach the ship," Alex panted as they ran. "If they've already boarded the Odyssey, we'll be trapped here with no way off the planet." Jake knew his tactical officer was right, but the thought of leaving Lyrithis behind felt like a betrayal of everything she had done for them. She had given up her family, her home, and probably her life to help people she barely knew. The least they could do was try to save her. They reached a junction where the service passage split in two directions. One led directly to the docking bays, the other curved back toward the main palace. Jake stopped, his mind racing through possibilities. "Lisa, Alex, get to the ship," he ordered. "Use the data crystal Lyrithis gave me to upgrade our defenses. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, leave without me." "Captain, that's suicide," Lisa protested. "There are hundreds of soldiers between here and the throne room." "She saved us," Jake said firmly. "I won't abandon her now." Before either of his teammates could argue further, Jake sprinted down the passage leading back into the palace. Behind him, he heard Alex curse and Lisa shout his name, but he didn't slow down. Every second he delayed was another second Lyrithis faced the fury of her family alone. The palace was in chaos. Alarms wailed through the crystal corridors, while soldiers ran in organized search patterns. Jake used his knowledge of human stealth techniques, staying in shadows and moving when the guards were looking elsewhere. The Zephyrians were efficient hunters, but they expected their prey to run for the exits, not deeper into their stronghold. As he got closer to the throne room, Jake could hear voices raised in anger. The ceremonial hall had been cleared of guests, leaving only the royal family and their most trusted advisors. Through a crack in the great doors, Jake could see Lyrithis standing in the center of the room, surrounded but not yet captured. "You have disgraced our family name," the Emperor was saying, his voice cold with fury. "To side with aliens against your own blood is unforgivable." "My own blood never cared whether I lived or died," Lyrithis replied. "These aliens treated me like a person worth knowing. That's more than any of you ever did." The crown prince stepped forward, his perfect features twisted with rage. "You gave them classified information. You betrayed military secrets to primitives who would use them against us. That makes you not just a traitor, but a fool." "I gave them the tools to defend themselves against your treachery," she said. "If that makes me a fool, then I'm proud to be one." Jake watched as the prince raised his hand to strike her. Without thinking, Jake burst through the doors and into the throne room. Every eye turned toward him as he strode across the polished floor to stand beside Lyrithis. "If you want to hurt her, you'll have to go through me first," Jake announced. The silence that followed was deafening. The Emperor stared at the human who had dared to enter his throne room uninvited, while the royal guards reached for their weapons. But it was the crown prince who spoke first. "How touching," he sneered. "The primitive has come to rescue his damaged princess. Tell me, human, do you truly find her scars attractive, or are you simply too desperate to be choosy?" Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice level. I find her courage attractive. I find her intelligence attractive. I find her compassion attractive. Her scars just prove that she's survived things that would have broken weaker people. Weakness, the prince spat. You both represent weakness. She for allowing herself to be damaged, and you for seeing value in damaged goods. No, said a new voice from the doorway. Princess Valthara, Lyrith's eldest sister, entered the throne room with a squad of elite guards. She was everything. Lyrithis was not, physically perfect and radiating cold authority. They represent something far more dangerous than weakness. She approached slowly, her movements predatory. They represent the idea that our standards might be wrong, that perfection might not be the only thing worth valuing. If that idea spreads, it could undermine our entire civilization. Jake looked between the two sisters and saw something he hadn't expected in Valthara's perfect features. Fear. The beautiful, flawless princess was afraid of what her scarred sister represented. You're afraid, Jake said with sudden understanding. You're afraid that if people see value in someone like Lyrithis, they might start questioning why you deserve to rule over them. Valthara's expression hardened. I'm afraid of nothing. I simply recognize a threat when I see one. She gestured to her guards. Take them both. The human will be held as a prisoner until we decide his fate. My sister will face judgment for her crimes against our people. The guards moved forward. But Lyrithis stepped in front of Jake. Wait, she said. I have something you need to hear. Her voice carried a new quality, something Jake had never heard from her before. Authority. Command. For the first time in her life, Lyrithis was speaking as a princess of Zephyr Prime. I invoke the right of challenge, she announced. The guards stopped immediately. Even Valthara looked shocked. The Emperor leaned forward on his crystal throne, his eyes wide. You cannot be serious, the Crown Prince said. You're too damaged to invoke ancient laws. The right of challenge can be invoked by any member of the royal bloodline who believes they have been wronged, Lyrithis said, her voice growing stronger. I have been cast aside and ignored my entire life because of physical imperfections. I challenge the idea that perfection equals worth. Jake didn't understand the legal implications, but he could see the effect her words had on the Zephyrians. In the room, ancient laws apparently carried weight even in this advanced civilization. If you invoke that right, you must face a champion in combat, the Emperor said slowly. Are you prepared for that consequence? I am, Lyrithis said without hesitation. Valthara smiled coldly. Then I will serve as champion for our family's honor. Sister or not, you will pay for your betrayal. Jake realized what was happening. Lyrithis was buying them time, but at a terrible cost. She would have to fight her own sister in single combat, and given her scars and isolation from military training, she had little chance of winning. I'll fight in her place, Jake said quickly. Impossible, the Crown Prince replied. The challenge is between members of our bloodline. No alien can represent royal interests. Then let me fight beside her, Jake insisted. Your champion is perfect and trained. Lyrithis has been neglected and isolated. That hardly seems fair. The Emperor considered this. The laws do allow for unusual circumstances. If the challenged party can find a volunteer to share her fate, they may fight together. His eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. Of course, if they lose, they both die. Jake looked at Lyrithis and saw gratitude and terror warring in her eyes. She had not expected him to risk his life for her, but she also knew that alone, The sound of distant explosions echoed through the palace as Jake helped Lyrithis remove her uncomfortable armor. Victory in the challenge had bought them their lives, but it had not stopped the larger betrayal that was unfolding across Zephyr Prime, somewhere in the chaos. His teammates were fighting for survival, while Jake was trapped in the throne room by ancient laws and royal protocol. "Your friends are dying while we waste time with ceremony," Velthara said from where she knelt on the arena floor. Despite her defeat, her voice carried bitter satisfaction. "The right of challenge may protect you here, but it cannot reach across the city to the docking bays." Jake looked desperately at the Emperor, who remained seated on his crystal throne with an expression of cold calculation. "You have what you wanted from us. Let my people go, and we'll leave your space forever." "I'm afraid that's no longer possible," the Emperor replied. "Too much has been revealed, too many secrets shared. Your species now knows too much about our capabilities and our intentions. We cannot allow that knowledge to return to your homeworld." Laerithis stepped forward, her voice carrying new authority after her victory in combat. "Father, these humans showed me more honor in a few days than our family has in my entire lifetime. They deserve better treatment than this." "What they deserve is irrelevant," the Crown Prince interjected. "What matters is what serves our empire's interests. The humans will be captured, their technology seized, and their knowledge extracted. Then they will disappear, and their primitive Earth will never know what became of them." The casual cruelty of the plan sent cold fury through Jake's chest. But before he could respond, a new sound echoed through the palace. It was different from the weapon fire they had been hearing, deeper and more rhythmic. It took Jake a moment to recognize what it was. "Those are human engines," he said with sudden hope. "The Odyssey is still operational." Through the great windows of the throne room, Jake could see flashes of light in the distance where the docking bays were located. But these weren't the chaotic flashes of battle. They were organized, purposeful, and growing brighter. A Zephyrian communications officer burst into the throne room, his perfect composure shattered by panic. "Your Majesty, the human vessel has somehow enhanced its defensive capabilities. Our forces cannot penetrate their shields, and they're fighting their way free of the docking bay." Jake felt a surge of pride in his crew. Somehow, Lisa and Alex had managed to implement Lyrathis technology improvements and turn them against their creators. The data crystal she had given him contained not just information, but salvation. "Impossible," Velthara sniffed. "Human technology is centuries behind ours. They cannot simply upgrade their systems in a matter of hours." "They can if they have help from someone who understands both technologies," Laerithis said quietly. All eyes turned to her as she continued. "I designed those improvements to be rapidly implemented by anyone with basic engineering knowledge. I wanted them to be useful, not just brilliant." The Emperor's expression hardened. "You gave them weapons, specifically designed to use against us." "I gave them the tools to defend themselves against betrayal," she replied. "The same betrayal you're attempting right now." Another explosion, much closer this time, shook the palace. Through the windows, Jake could see the distinctive blue glow of the Odyssey's engines rising above the crystal spires of the city. His ship was fighting its way out of the trap, probably coming to rescue him, just as he had tried to rescue Lyrathis. "This changes nothing," the Crown Prince declared. "One human ship cannot stand against our entire fleet. We'll destroy them in open space if necessary. Will you?" Jake asked, thinking about the improvements Lyrathis had described. Enhanced shields, better weapons, more efficient power systems. The Odyssey might be small, but it was no longer. Helpless Dot, the communications officer, approached the Emperor with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty, there's more. The human ship is broadcasting on all frequencies. They're telling our people about the planned betrayal, about the unfair treatment of Princess Lyrathis, about our attempts to steal their technology." Jake smiled grimly. Lisa was fighting with information as well as weapons, turning the Zephyrians' own perfectionist society against them. If their people learned that their leaders were willing to break honor and law to maintain their advantage. It might cause internal problems that would be harder to solve than a simple military engagement. Shut down all communications, the Emperor ordered. I will not have alien propaganda corrupting our citizens. But it was too late. The damage was already spreading through Zephyrian society like cracks in crystal. Jake could see it in the faces of the nobles and officials who had witnessed the challenge combat. They had seen a scarred princess and a primitive human defeat their perfect champion through intelligence and determination. Seeds of doubt were already growing. Father, Lyrithus said, "It's not too late to stop this. You could still let them go with honor intact on both sides." Honor? Velthara laughed bitterly from the floor. What honor is there in letting inferior beings escape with our secrets? What honor is there in admitting that a damaged princess knows better than the rightful rulers of our people? The honor of keeping your word, Jake said simply. The honor of treating others with the same respect you expect for yourselves. The honor of being worthy of the power you claim. The Emperor stood slowly, his crystalline robes catching and reflecting the light from the windows. For a moment, Jake thought he might actually listen to reason. Then his expression hardened into the same cold perfection that defined his entire civilization. "Take them to the security chambers," he commanded. "The human will be held until his ship can be recaptured. My daughter will be confined until she can be properly re-educated about her loyalties." The guards moved forward, but they stopped when Lyrithus raised her hand. The authority she had gained from her combat victory still carried weight, even in defeat. "I invoke the right of exile," she announced. The silence that followed was absolute. Jake didn't understand the implications, but he could see shock and horror in every Zephyrian face in the room. "You cannot," the Emperor whispered. "That law hasn't been invoked in over 1,000 years. Any member of the royal bloodline who has been wronged by their family may choose permanent exile rather than accept punishment," Lyrithus recited. "They forfeit all claims to titles, lands, and inheritance, but they gain the right to leave forever with whatever companions they choose." Jake realized what she was offering. A way out for both of them, but at the cost of everything she had ever known. She would become a person without a people, cut off forever from her homeworld and her culture. "If you do this, you can never return," the Crown Prince said. "You will be declared dead to our family, forgotten by our people." "Is your loyalty to these aliens worth that sacrifice?" Lyrithus looked at Jake, then at her family, and at the watching nobles who had spent her entire life treating her as invisible. When she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. "My loyalty is to people who see me as worth saving," she said. "If that's not here, then yes, it's worth any sacrifice." The ancient law could not be denied, even by an emperor who hated its implications. Within hours, Jake found himself aboard the Odyssey with Lyrithus beside him, watching Zephyr Prime shrink in the viewscreen as they jumped to hyperspace. Dr. Lisa Carter was treating Lyrithus' injuries while Commander Alex Hughes monitored for pursuit that never came. "The improvements she gave us are incredible," Lisa reported. "Our ship is now more advanced than anything in the Earth fleet. We have shields that can withstand weapons 10 times our size, engines that can outrun most military vessels, and power systems that are almost impossibly efficient." But it was Alex's report that made Jake smile. "The broadcasts we sent out are still spreading through Zephyrian space. Their own people are asking questions about why they tried to betray diplomatic guests and why they kept such a brilliant mind hidden away because of a few scars. Apparently, revolution is brewing." Jake looked at Lyrithus, who was staring out at the stars with an expression of wonder mixed with loss. She had given up everything she had ever known to help people who had shown her kindness for less than a week. "Do you regret it?" he asked her. She considered the question carefully before answering. I regret the pain my family feels, even though they brought it on themselves. I regret that my people may suffer because of the changes that are coming. But I don't regret choosing to stand with beings who value intelligence over appearance, courage over perfection, and loyalty over power. Months later, Jake stood before the United Earth Council as Lyrithis presented her technological gifts to humanity. The improvements she had developed would revolutionize human space travel, defense systems, and energy production. But more than that, her presence proved that humanity could find allies among the stars, beings who valued the same things humans did. The galaxy is vast and full of species who judge worth by different standards, she told the assembled leaders. Some, like my former people, value only perfection and power. Others might value strength, or age, or conformity. But humans are unique in their ability to see value in the imperfect, hope in the damaged, and beauty in the scarred.